Today, a truck driver granted bail after being charged over a bus crash that left school children with horrific injuries. Next week's Quad meeting in Sydney cancelled after Joe Biden pulls out. Homicide investigation. New Zealand police treating the Wellington hostel fire as arson. And is it too late to put the AI genie back into the bottle? Calls for more regulation of the industry. Hello and welcome to ABC News. I'm Regid Ahmed. Harrowing details have now emerged from yesterday's school bus crash in Melbourne's west. Doctors worked through the night to treat children with spinal injuries, amputations and crushed limbs. A truck driver faced court late today on dangerous driving charges.
Police detectives stayed at the horrific scene for nearly 24 hours, trying to unpack the crash that caused a school bus carrying 45 primary school students to flip on its side. 7 children are in hospital with serious injuries.
The children have suffered multiple and traumatic injuries, including partial and complete amputations of arms, multiple crushed limb injuries, severe lacerations to head and body, head injuries.
The fact that it involves school students just breaks your heart, and my heart goes out to them and their families.
Some of the injuries are truly life-changing, and this incident was avoidable.
The accident happened in Ainsbury in Melbourne's outer west. Police allege the school bus was turning right when it was struck from behind by a truck. Its driver, 49-year-old Jamie Gleeson, has been charged with 4 counts of dangerous driving, causing serious injury. A court today heard he'd been driving trucks for 18 years with a clear record and returned negative drug and alcohol tests. He's been granted bail. The court also heard he rang 000 and aided rescue efforts. Emergency services praised first responders, including teachers and the injured bus driver, who scrambled to help.
Some of them are heroes. At the time that the bus overturned, I understand that there was diesel leaking from the bus, and it's a really confronting scene.
The school's principal was among them.
Our staff just instinctively wrapped their arms around the kids and provided love and support and comfort in a really, really difficult situation.
For some, it was back to school today. For others, the beginning of a long road to recovery.
It will be a long journey for these children and their families, but we're here to provide the support for that whole journey.
We're just taking it really easy today and just surrounding our kids with love and support.
Whatever you ask for, the answer will be yes. We're there for you.
The driver will return to court in October. Kate Ashton, ABC News, Melbourne.
US President Joe Biden has cancelled his upcoming trip to Australia, blaming tense negotiations with congressional leaders over the United States' debt ceiling for scuttling his travel plans. The Sydney Opera House was set to play host to this year's Quad Leaders Summit, but instead the President will meet with the Prime Ministers of Australia, Japan and India on the sidelines of the G7 meeting in Hiroshima.
Smiles, or more likely grimaces, in the Oval Office.
We're having a wonderful time. Everything's going well.
As negotiations with Congress over how much debt the United States can rack up come down to the wire.
America pays its debts, pays its bills.
With the deadline looming, the President's decided time away from Washington, D.C. needs to be as brief as possible.
I'm cutting my trip short.
Joe Biden is heading to Japan for the G7 Leaders Summit this weekend and was then due to travel to Papua New Guinea en route to Australia, where he'd been invited to address federal parliament in Canberra before attending the Quad Leaders Summit at the Sydney Opera House.
The Quad Leaders meeting will not be going ahead in Sydney next week.
The American, Australian, Japanese and Indian leaders instead planning to sit down in Hiroshima. In an early morning phone call, Joe Biden promised Anthony Albanese he'll try to visit Australia later this year and offered him an invite to DC. India's Narendra Modi will still visit Sydney. Japan's Fumio Kishida will stay home. The President's security detail had been pre-positioned in Australia for some time. US Air Force planes flying in people, equipment and vehicles ahead of the Quad Summit. The dire warnings on the debt situation reverberating across the Pacific.
There are quite drastic consequences for the US economy, which will flow on to the global economy.
It is possible to get a deal by the end of the week. It's not that difficult to get to an agreement.
The Prime Minister says he understands why President Biden needs to rush back to Washington after the G7, but there's still little doubt that this is a significant disappointment for the Australian government. And at a time when the United States is trying to reassert itself in the Indo-Pacific, it's a setback for Joe Biden's strategic ambitions as well. Matthew Doran, ABC News, Canberra.
New Zealand police are treating the deadly blaze at a Wellington hostel as arson as they begin a homicide investigation into what happened. The death toll remains at 6, but others are still missing.
As the grim task of recovering bodies begins, Wellington police have revealed they're treating this hostel fire as arson.
Because it is an arson investigation, we do have a list of people that we want to speak to. I'm not prepared to say who they are or where they are. However, our investigation teams are working rapidly.
With the Loafers Lodge building now deemed safe to enter, police have been examining the scene of the fatal blaze. The death toll stands at 6, but many are still missing.
I can say that we have accounted for 92 people, and that the number still to be accounted for is less than 20.
Wellington's mayor has urged the community to be patient.
We have to do this right so we can honour those that have lost their lives, but also ensure that this doesn't happen again.
The stories of those who called this hostel home are beginning to emerge. Simon Hannafy was living under a tree before he found a room here.
It's somewhere you go when you've hit rock bottom, pretty much, or it was for me.
The lodge was compliant with building code, but it didn't have sprinklers. There are growing calls for an inquiry into the quality of accommodation that's offered to some of the community's most vulnerable.
The building has a monthly inspection where they go through and check making sure that all the services are up to standard.
I have asked the Minister for Housing to look particularly at issues around building regulation to see whether there's anything more that we should be doing right at this point.
It will be some time before investigations here at Loafers Lodge are complete. There are still many questions about how this tragedy could have happened. Police say they're working as fast as they can to provide answers. Emily Clark, ABC News, Wellington.
Wages are rising at the fastest annual rate in a decade, with the latest economic data showing around half of Australian workers have secured a pay increase above 3%. Very few, though, have come even close to matching inflation. Even so, some economists say it could still increase the likelihood of another interest rate rise.
Changing jobs has helped this sales manager get a pay rise.
A month after I was made redundant, Airwallex picked me up. They gave me a 5% increase on my previous salary and I never looked back.
Wages grew by 0.8% in the March quarter and 3.7% for the year. That's the highest annual increase since September 2012. Pay rises in the public sector are starting to catch up with those in the private sector. Around half of all workers got a pay rise above 3%, but only 1 in 10 came close to matching inflation.
The biggest increases in wages over the last 12 months were in service areas like education and training, professional, scientific and technical services.
Public servant Tina Cohen got a 3.5% pay increase.
We don't go out to meals. We're not spending our money now because we don't have it.
The Reserve Bank fears hefty pay increases will fuel inflation, requiring even higher interest rates to curb consumer prices. And while the latest data came in around expectations, economists say wages growth in the services sector could raise alarm bells for the RBA.
Certainly that'll have the Reserve Bank probably debating a rate rise again when they meet next month.
The government wants the lowest paid to get an increase in line with inflation from the Fair Work Commission, which will announce its decision next month.
Decent wages growth is part of the solution to cost of living pressures, not part of the problem.
It's all ready for invoicing.
This boss says she can't afford it.
The unions are calling on a 7% increase. I might as well just pack my bags up now and shut the doors. I just can't do it.
Wage rises more contentious than ever during a time of high inflation. Rihanna Whitson, ABC News.
A New South Wales coronial inquiry into the Black Summer bushfires is examining what role backburns played. Those commanding the Gospers Mountain blaze from the ground and the air are being cross-examined, and there's disagreement over whether a burn northwest of Sydney should have been done at all.
Fighting fire with fire. It's not unusual, but it's under the spotlight this week. It was supposed to protect lives and homes. But in December 2019, a backburn near Mount Wilson didn't go to plan, contributing to what became a mega blaze, Australia's largest bushfire. Christopher Banfi was providing help from the air. He told the inquest the weather forecast that day raised red flags for him. Given the weather conditions, given the fuel conditions and expected winds, I've considered this to be high risk. The weather deteriorated earlier than predicted. Mr. Banfi said at about 2 p.m. they landed the helicopter to alert crews on the ground. From above, he said flames were being fuelled by growing winds with spot fires ahead. At this point in time, I believed we were going to lose it. I could not see how we were going to hold it. Craig Burley from the RFS told the inquiry the fire became erratic, but doing nothing wasn't an option. We had a window of opportunity that was conducive, we had a plan that was resourced, and if the same parameters were put to me tomorrow, I would support the plan again. But he conceded more water bombers would have helped. Aerial resources would have been handy and could have changed the outcome. The Gospers Mountain fire ended up burning through 1 million hectares, destroyed 100 homes, and was alight for almost 80 days.
The inquiry will hear from more witnesses later this week before the focus turns to a blaze which destroyed dozens of homes at Conjola Park on the state's south coast. It will look at whether backburning played a part. Xanthi Gregory, ABC News, Sydney.
The Queensland Premier is making key changes to her cabinet, with several ministers moving portfolios as her government faces increased scrutiny over its handling of youth crime, health and housing. The move, which caught many by surprise, won't see any new faces brought onto the team, and the Queensland opposition says it won't solve the government's problems.
A brawl breaks out in a Gold Coast chemist, allegedly involving 2 juveniles. A security guard is tackled, then dragged to the floor as bystanders rush to help.
We don't want that. We don't want to see that. It shouldn't be coming to that.
Anger over youth crime and burning frustration with health and housing have put unrelenting pressure on the state government, enough so that it's triggered the Premier to change her front bench. Yvette Darth will be removed from health and is likely to become Attorney-General in a direct swap with Shannon Fentiman. Megan Scanlon will move from Environment and Youth Affairs to Housing, replacing Leanne Enoch, and Leanne Linnard will be moved out of Youth Justice. It's not known where the pair will be moved to, but they'll stay in Cabinet.
If Anastasia Palaszczuk thinks that changing a few faces around in a reshuffle is going to save her dying government, she's got another thing coming.
Miss Palaszczuk was lying low, yet to confirm her new look team, leaving her ministers to defend their colleagues.
I've got to say, Yvette Darth, who's a very good friend of mine, I've got a lot of time for her, I'm very supportive of her. I'm really proud of the work she's done in health.
Every single minister in the Palaszczuk cabinet works hard every single hour of the day.
And I have all faith in all of our cabinet ministers that sit around the table.
Anastasia Palaszczuk is using this reshuffle as a circuit breaker for the portfolios that are copping a lot of heat. But the way this shake-up has been handled, with many inside government taken by surprise, has raised questions about whether the change will provide the stable image of government the Premier is after.
Premier makes decisions that best suit her and best suit the Cabinet.
The new team will be formally announced and sworn in tomorrow. Rachel Rieger, ABC News, Brisbane.
Australians who are blind or vision impaired say hybrid and electric vehicles are putting their lives at risk. A recent survey found many have either been hit by or had a near miss with an EV, prompting calls to fit all new electric vehicles with noise-emitting devices.
Up to the curb. Come on, climb the curb, darling.
Every time John Barlow crosses the road, he's risking his life. One of more than 550,000 Australians who are blind or have low vision.
Jazzy, forward. Let's go.
John relies on his hearing to do things most of us take for granted.
an electric vehicle has less noise at the moment than a combustion car, so it really does, I suppose, take my confidence levels away when I want to cross the street independently. All right, ready to work? Okay, let's go. Find the door.
A survey by Vision Australia and Monash University found 1 in 3 vision impaired people had either been hit by or had a near miss with an electric vehicle.
One guy actually, and it was quite ironic looking back, he actually yelled at me, "Didn't you hear me?" And I went, "No." I had no idea until virtually it was on top of me that was an electric vehicle.
Vision Australia has been fighting for changes to EVs since 2018.
We just see this problem reoccurring and becoming worse for our community.
We agree that if a safety issue, then we should be doing that and making that noise. And point I'd make is it should be all vehicles, not just EVs.
It's not yet clear if existing vehicles would need to be retrofitted.
With 80,000 cars already on the road, it's already a risk for our community. So we would like a change to encompass all cars that are in our community.
The federal government will soon decide whether acoustic systems should be mandatory for all electric vehicles in Australia. Public submissions close at the end of the month.
That's a good girl. Let's go the curb.
Hinako Shiraishi, ABC News, Canberra.
Coming up on 7:30 with Sarah Ferguson, the student loans rising faster than they can be paid off.
I think that it's just one of life's inevitabilities. I can't do anything about it except let it come out of my salary.
You're not really getting anywhere. You're paying it off, but then the government whacks all this money back on it. So it's sort of just standing still.
Also, the group of prominent law academics calling for the immediate release from prison of Kathleen Folbig. That's coming up.
The United Nations says highly vulnerable communities in Myanmar are dealing with a nightmare scenario after Cyclone Mocha. At least 40 people are dead and hundreds are still missing after the powerful storm barreled into the country's coast on Sunday. The impoverished Rakhine state is one of the worst hit and faced 210 km/h winds. One of its main bridges has since given way, exacerbating aid and rescue operations. There have long been warnings about the rapid rise of artificial intelligence and the potential risks of these powerful systems. Now, the head of the company that created ChatGPT says he too is anxious about its potential to do harm. He's calling for the AI sector to be regulated before it's too late.
The whole truth.
Sounding the siren on an artificial threat, the human behind ChatGPT.
My worst fears are that we, the field, the technology, the industry, cause significant harm to the world.
In his first appearance since generative AI was thrust into the spotlight, Sam Altman, the chief executive of OpenAI, led the clarion call to rein in artificial intelligence, which has the power to spread misinformation, imitate presidents, and wipe out jobs.
If this technology goes wrong, it can go quite wrong.
There's increasing unease about the dangers of AI, and in March, more than 1,000 people, including Elon Musk, signed an open letter calling for a 6-month pause.
There's a strong probability that it will make life much better and that we'll have an age of abundance. And there's some chance that it goes wrong and destroys humanity. Hopefully that chance is small, but it's not zero.
Tech giants, once stewards of this type of technology, are now locked in an arms race to carve out their share of the market.
We're talking about trillion-dollar industries being created in front of our eyes. And so it is very much a race, and it's hard for them to resist those pressures, those commercial pressures.
To tackle this, Sam Altman told Congress that the industry needs guardrails. He says there should be a government agency licensing who can create AI, safety standards which make sure the technology doesn't create dangerous or fake content, and audits to make sure everyone is following the rules. What you're hearing right now isn't actually my voice. We're using AI technology that's already available on the internet and takes less than a minute. It's not perfect, it's a little British, but it shows how powerful these tools already are. Danny Tran, ABC News.
To finance now, and the Australian dollar fell after the wages data came out today, and the local share market continued to ease as well. Here's Alan Kohler.
A few graphs about wages to start with. Annual growth in wages was 3.7%, the highest in a decade, but there are fewer people getting a raise. The proportion of employees saying they got a pay rise has fallen from 2/3 to less than 40%. 10% got more than 6%, which is also a decade high, as is the 40% getting between 3 and 6%. The 0 to 3% brigade is down from 80% to less than half. Around 90% of businesses are still reporting that they're having trouble finding staff, which may have something to do with the fact that their staff are not keeping up with inflation. Real wages growth has improved a little, but it's still deeply negative. The Australian dollar dropped when the wages data came out because that 3.7% was a bit less than the 3.8% expected. But then it rallied and then it fell again and kept falling and is now in the low 66s. Rhythm Biosciences, the Aussie biotech developing a blood test for colon cancer to replace the poo sample, saw its share price almost double today after announcing that it's got regulatory approval in the UK and Europe. Apart from that, it was largely red ink, with Incitec Pivot down 8% after a disappointing half-year result, and miners down as well after falls on commodity markets as a result of that weaker than expected Chinese economic data yesterday. And the US share market fell after President Biden put off his trip to Australia because of the debt ceiling crisis. Things must be really bad if he can't come here. And that's finance.
Alan Kohler there. The waters off southern Australia once housed some of our most productive reefs. Described by scientists as equivalent to the Great Barrier Reef, they had been left badly damaged by overfishing in the late 1800s. Now a federal project involving 5 states has just finished rebuilding some of them.
These are the last rocks going to make Australia's most southern native shellfish reefs south of Hobart. They'll be seeded with native Angazi oysters in a bid to rebuild a once common underwater ecosystem.
It's also providing habitat for lots of other really great marine invertebrates, fishes, other smaller fishes and plants.
Early records revealed these reefs were fished heavily by European settlers in the 1800s.
The colonists immediately recognised these native Angazi oysters because they're very similar to the European flat oyster. And so they started fishing for them in the late 1800s and they were using them for food and they were using them also for construction, making lime out of the shells.
Anita Nedosico has led the project's biggest shellfish reef development on the Yorke Peninsula in South Australia.
Already what we're seeing is crabs and shrimps and sponges and forests of seaweed. And then as these little critters are starting to grow, we're starting to see all of these bigger fish start to come to the reefs as well.
These new reefs are being modelled on the last known natural shellfish reef at St Helens on Tasmania's east coast. It's a haven for sea life.
We know how beautiful the Great Barrier Reef is. That's the equivalent of what we had in our southern waters.
Around Australia, there are 13 of these native shellfish reefs under construction. In October, divers will check to see if local fish communities have settled in. The 13 sites have been funded by the federal government. The Nature Conservancy hopes to rebuild 60 shellfish reefs around the country. Fiona Breen, ABC News.
The Collingwood Magpies Super Netball team is in crisis with the future of the club at a crossroads. The Magpies, who are aligned to the AFL team, are reviewing their place in the competition after struggling on and off court. Netball authorities have committed to 8 teams next season, leaving the door open for a new club if the Magpies collapse.
One club, 2 very different stories. The Magpies sit atop the AFL ladder, pulling record crowds with entertaining performances. Their Super Netball side is languishing at the bottom again, and now their future is in jeopardy.
So at this time it's hard for us to forecast whether they will continue.
Financial struggles, modest crowds and a change in leadership has prompted the club to question its viability in the competition.
Netball is a part of their broader sporting program, so as a part of that review they will obviously work out what their priorities are.
Magpie CEO Craig Kelly met with players yesterday.
They just must be devastated. You know, I'm getting teary thinking about it. It's very upsetting for them.
Star goalkeeper Jiva Mentor took to Instagram to send a strong message to Netball Australia. To add to the uncertainty, no players from any team are contracted beyond this season because a new pay deal hasn't been resolved. Even if the Magpies collapse, an 8-team competition is guaranteed.
We have no doubt that we'll be able to continue to maintain our status with the 8 teams.
Netball Australia is confident a new group could step in. Former Diamonds head coach Lisa Alexander expects the Magpies will have to fold, and their replacement must be from Victoria.
Netball Victoria really need to get going as well, because we cannot afford to have only one super netball club in Victoria.
The Magpies are set to make a decision in a week or so. An excruciating wait for a team hanging by a thread. Tom Maddox, ABC News, Melbourne.
Well, fresh off the back of the Dolphins' success in the NRL, another Queensland side is pitching to become the 18th team. The Brisbane Tigers were beaten out for the last franchise licence, but have met with league officials again to have another crack at being included.
The colours, even the logo, might look familiar to rugby league fans.
We know that we can't be the Tigers in the NRL competition. We'd love to be.
For obvious reasons. The name and branding are still to be decided, but the Brisbane Tigers have put a case to the NRL off the back of the league's latest success story.
They're a traditional club and they're performing very well.
Surprising everyone in their debut season, the Dolphins hail from Redcliffe, north of Brisbane. The Tigers want to capitalise on the south.
We're 71 kilometres away from the Titans, and that's a large gap between when you compare the Broncos, who are 38 kilometres away from Redcliffe.
With decades of rich rugby league history, the club's been to the NRL with their pitch before. They've ruled out rehashing their old Firehawks proposal. Also off the table, collaborating with other potential bidders.
Well, there's been a lot of talk in the media about Pacifica, North Sydney Bears, there's Perth, there's New Zealand.
The Tigers welcome the competition, spruiking their recent stadium makeover in their initial meetings with the league last week. The NRL still hasn't confirmed a timeline for the new side's introduction. The club says it's ready to go right now. For NRL teams were based here during Magic Round, and at least 3 women's games will be played here this season.
We've got all the training facilities, we've got administrative space upstairs, so we could start tomorrow.
It's more likely the new franchise will coincide with the NRL's new broadcast deal beyond 2027. Brittany Klein, ABC News, Brisbane.
Australian Nick Kyrgios has pulled out of the upcoming French Open as he continues to recover from a knee injury. Kyrgios also withdrew from the Australian Open in January and had surgery, but is yet to play a match on tour this year. At the Rome Masters, top seed Novak Djokovic accused Great Britain's Cameron Norrie of unsportsmanlike behaviour during their round of 16 encounter. Djokovic won the match 6-3, 6-4 before giving Norrie a serve.
He's allowed to take a medical timeout. He's allowed to hit the player. He's allowed to say, come on, in the face, more or less every single point. But, those are the things that we players know that in the locker room it's not the fair play.
Let's get the weather now with Paul Higgins.
A large high is going to keep most of the nation dry tomorrow, but in the southeast we've got a couple of weak cold fronts that are going to pass by tomorrow evening into Friday, another one on Saturday. Neither of them will bring more than just a few showers. Closer in, mostly sunny across Queensland, apart from a shower or two on the Cassowary coast and northern Cape York. In Brisbane, it should be a mostly sunny day. Still a shower or two expected along the New South Wales coast tomorrow, and some morning frost across the ranges and inland plains. In Sydney, a shower or two mostly near the coastal fringe, a chilly and frosty morning for Canberra, and then partly cloudy. There is a frost warning for Victoria's north and also out in East Gippsland, a shower or two on and south of the ranges. A cloudy day for Melbourne with a morning shower or two. A frost warning has been posted for most of Tasmania. Light showers in the west are going to spread to the south later. It'll be partly cloudy in Hobart before those evening showers coming in there. In South Australia, a frost warning for the mid-north, the Riverland, Murraylands and also the upper southeast. A possible shower near the southern and western coasts, and in Adelaide, just a chance of a shower. For WA, light showers about the coast between Walpole and Bremer Bay, and also along the coast east of Israelite Bay, but sunny skies for Perth, although it will be a little on the breezy side. Dry across the north and sunny over the Northern Territory, but some gusty southeasterly winds across central districts. Sunny and 32 in Darwin.
Remember, you can keep up to date at news.abc.net.au and on ABC iView. I'm Regid Ahmed. Stay with us now for 7:30.